I don't know about you, but one of the things that I find the hardest to retouch is when you have a light skinned baby on a kind of taupey or really pinks always just throw off my eyes. So I have a really hard time seeing if it's the way that I want it, if it looks quite right. So this is one of those incidents where the skin tone by the numbers just really comes in handy so that I can trust that what I'm seeing actually looks accurate. So the first thing that you do whenever you're working with skin tones by the number is to read your values. So if you come over here, you've got your little eyedropper tool. And if you go to the color sampler tool, that will actually place a point. The other thing that you can do is if you're on your eyedropper, you can hold shift and place your point. And I like to put it in the fused highlight on the forehead. If you put it in the highlight on the cheek, you can sometimes get an off reading because it's measuring some of that pink in the cheeks. And you don't really want to take too much pink out. So the forehead is usually a better read. So somewhere around there is pretty good. You could also put it in the tip of her nose. Sometimes that can give you an okay reading as well. So first off, before I do any, obviously, like she's got red fingers, she's got some red around her eyes, she's got a very red foot, red-blue foot, and some kind of chalky skin tone here. Before I even all that out, I want to do a global adjustment to make sure that she's kind of in the range that I want. So with skin tones, you want your CMYK values. So you're going to hit this little guy right here, this little drop down. You're going to change it to CMYK and change it to CMYK. And you always want, for a Caucasian baby, you always want your cyan to be about a third of the amount of magenta and yellow. Sometimes for a really light skinned baby, you want it to be closer to a fifth. So not very much cyan comparatively. And you want your magenta to always be lower than your yellow. But for the most part, you want these pretty close together. So seeing that this one is 24 and this one is 33, that tells me, if I wasn't even looking at this picture, that this baby's probably pretty yellow. And she is. She definitely looks like she's got a little bit of jaundice happening here. And so I want to make sure that that looks nice and neutral and get those numbers a little bit closer together. The cyan's actually not too bad on this one. 9 times 3 is 27. So somewhere, if we bring up this magenta a little bit, we're going to be right in the right ballpark here. And 6 times 3 is 24. So if we bring down the yellow, we'd be right in there here. So the way that I like to fix these is bring up a curve. And you can go either from the top down or you can add points. But usually when I'm in these diffused highlights and I'm working on a fairly light skinned baby, I'll just go from the top down. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go to my red channel. The opposite of cyan is red. So if I want my cyan to go down, I'm going to add red. And if I want it to go up, I'm going to take out red. Cyan's not really my issue there. So instead, I'm going to go to my green channel. The opposite of magenta is green. So here I want to add magenta, which means taking out green. So I'm going to come up to the top of this curve and I'm just going to drop it down a little bit and get those closer. So here now I've got it 30, 30. This one is too high. So I've gone a little bit too far. So I'm going to just boost it up by hitting my arrow key. And there's 28 and 30, 28, 31. That's much better. And actually, I don't think that we need to adjust the yellows now that we've adjusted that green, because that yellow is now much closer and overall, these numbers look really good now. So I'm going to back out here so you can see there's our before, there's our after. And now that I've made that shift, my eyes can see that, oh yeah, it was way too green at the beginning on a global scale. So this is a very light pink background in person. And as it was here, my brain initially thought, oh yeah, it's kind of that light pinky taupe color. But as soon as it's corrected, you go, oh no, it's pink. So sometimes you need to use that shift just to see what you're not seeing. So I always like to read my skin tones that way, just to kind of have a global understanding of do I have a little bit of a shift in my white balance, basically. And in this case, I would say that I did. So the next thing that I'm going to do is try and even out all of her skin tone so that we've got a nice even, these red areas go away, this blue foot goes away. And you do that with localized adjustments rather than a full global one like we just did. So first I'm going to grab her eyes, her nose, her little fingers and toes, and maybe even just some of this forearm here. We'll just go like that. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I'm going to feather the heck out of it, and then I'm going to add a hue saturation layer. Now, let's say if you were on a bright blue background or something, you wouldn't have needed to make that selection because you don't need to with the hue saturation layers. But in this case, because the skin tone is so close to the background, we do need to make a selection. And the reason why is that when you go to your reds channel and you bring it all the way up, you're going to see that it's coming onto the background, and we don't want it to do that. So we need to make sure that that area is not affected, and just the areas that we want to be affected are affected. So somewhere in here is kind of where I like it. The darker green areas are what are being affected the most. The blue is by far the most. And since we just looked at her, we know that this foot's pretty red, her fingers are pretty red, and those are the areas. So we know we're hitting the right areas now. So now I'm going to come back down to 0. I'm going to bring up that hue. I'm going to bring up my saturation, and I'm going to bring up my lightness. And now when we turn it on and off, you can see that that sting of red is starting to go away. Now you could paint out her little cheeks, or the other thing you could do is just add it back in manually. So just by going to like a little bit of a soft little layer on her cheeks, add a little teeny bit of red just to give her a little bit of life right in the middle there. So see there, just like the slightest little bit. So that's getting better. I do still have a little bit more red that I want to come out in this hand and this foot. But you'll notice that, like, yes, it's red, but it's also kind of cold looking, and I want to fix that. So I'm going to just do a little selection again. I'm going to add a curve, and I'm going to bring it up just a little bit so that it's not quite so dark. I'm going to hide that. Command H will hide your selection when you're working like that. And then since we know that the opposite of cyan is red, we're going to actually add red, which is going to sound crazy, but I promise. We're going to add a little bit of red. Then we're going to go to the blue channel, and we're going to take out a little bit of blue to get that nice warm tone. I'm going to hit OK. There's our before, there's our after. Now we've got a weird line here on her back that we want to make sure we smooth out because I didn't do a very good thorough selection. So I'm just going to kind of use my paintbrush to paint just a little bit of warmth in some of these colder areas, like around her nose and face, and then a little bit onto her hand here. And then if it's too far, you can just drop the opacity a touch so that you've got nice even skin tones. So there's our before, there's our after. She's looking much healthier, happier, all around much better. All right, here's an example where the baby is half black. So she has slightly darker skin. She's not a very light toned Caucasian baby like we have talked about. And so what I want to do here is make sure that her skin tone is appropriate for her while also keeping my background as light and bright and airy as I want it to be. So in this situation, we're not looking at that third cyan. It's usually closer to half. And then depending on how, like yellow or magenta we want her to be, they can either be closer together, or I still like to have just a teeny bit more yellow. But let's just see how this goes here. So first off, let's look and see what she's at right now. So I'm going to just put this into the diffused highlight on her forehead. And I'm also going to put it on her nose right here just to see the difference between the two. I'm going to come over here to my info palette. I'm going to change it to CMYK, and let's see what it's doing. So, okay, we're not too terribly far off. The biggest issue that we're having is that she is more magenta than she is yellow. And we've got more than half cyan. So let's fix those two things and just make a subtle shift. So first off, I'm going to select my subject so that it's just affecting her and not all the background around her. And unfortunately, it's going to select the whole crate rather than just her. So what I'm going to do is just go with this like this for now, and then we can refine if we need to. Let's see what happens. So I'm just going to feather that a little bit, and then I'm going to add a curves layer. And I'm going to go back to my eyedropper here, and I'm going to hold Shift Command click, and that will put that point on my curve everywhere. And then I'm going to come up here to my highlight, and I'm just going to drop it, or I'm going to drop that cyan level by adding some red, just ticking it up a little bit. I'm going to come to this point and just take that up just a teeny bit so that it's kind of coming up together, and slowly and gradually. Same thing with my greens. In order to drop my magenta, I'm going to add some green. So I'm going to just bring that up and bring that up. And then I'm going to go to my blues, and I'm going to drop down the blues to get some yellow in here. And I don't want to go too far, but just enough. Okay, so now 17 is about half. And then we've got more magenta than we have yellow. The only thing over here is we still have a little bit too much magenta. So I'm going to go back to that green, and I'm going to go down to this point, and I'm just going to take a little bit more magenta out by adding just a touch more green. I'm going to bring that up, and then I'm going to go down to my blues. So much of this is just toggling back and forth to get it about where you want it. And there we go. So now I'm at least even, and that's about a third, which is good. And this is closer to half in that diffused highlight. So there's our before, or there's our after. It's definitely a lot warmer. Now, I don't like what it's doing to this pillow behind her. So instead of filling it like that, I'm just going to take the whole thing and black it out. And then I'm going to paint in just her skin using my brush and going around her face. That way the pillow and the gray behind her are not getting affected. I don't want them to look green. I just want to take some of this magenta tone out of her skin. So somewhere like that. And then the other thing that I really want to do is I do want to darken her down just a teeny bit, because in person she is a little bit darker than she appears in this image. And I think that a lot of that is from that lighter background, just processing out on the res and making the background look good has made her skin tone just come up a little bit too bright. So there's before, there's after. You can see it's adding quite a bit of yellow and green. If we've gone a little bit too far, we can always go back. And I want to say that we've just got a little bit too much yellow in that highlight area. Okay, there we go. See how she looks like so magenta-y pink at first? It almost is like that looks too far and the first is too far. So we maybe want to find an in-between. And that's kind of the game with this, is just like finding where it feels good to you. And this second point is just throwing me off. It might just be that her nose is, too much of a specular highlight for her, because I do like it somewhere in the middle there a little bit better. I'm at 78 opacity rather than the full 100. And I think that does look better and a little bit more natural. So I'm going to keep it right there. That's how I would go about fixing her skin tone. I hope that's helpful. And we'll look at a couple of other skin tones here. All right, next we're going to look at this baby here. She is shown on this bright tealy blue color. And so her skin definitely looks a little bit yellow to me, but I just want to check and see. So I'm going to go ahead and put my eyedropper up in her forehead in kind of that lighter, brighter, diffused highlight area. And I'm going to just change it over here to CMYK, and let's see. So we've got very little cyan, but she's a pretty light skin toned baby, so that's fair. And really like 5 times the amount of cyan is kind of the max of what we would want. So 28 is a little bit outside that. So that I think is what's making her look just teeny bit yellow, is she's just a little high in the yellow here and a little low in the magentas. So a little bit of a curve, I think, will help us out quite a bit. So let's go ahead and add that curve layer. You can use it with an action, or you can also go down to this guy down here, get your curve. And then I'm going to get this out of the way. There we go. I'm going to hold Shift Command and click on that spot there. I'm going to go to my reds. And actually, I'm going to leave those guys alone for a second. I'm going to go to my greens instead, and I'm going to just up my greens just a teeny bit. Actually, let's go down on our greens just a teeny bit. Yep, that's going to be better. And then I'm going to go to my yellows, and I'm going to drop them down. Excuse me, I'm totally backwards today. I'm going to go up on my blues, somewhere in that region, and then let's go to our reds. And I'm just going to pull that point off and come down from the very top. I don't want the 6, I think, is about where I want it. Okay, so 6 times 3 would be 18. So we're well within that 3rd to a 5th percentiles. And see how that sting of yellowy green has left her skin, and even like the background color looks more vibrant because we've taken that shift out of her skin. So in my opinion, that looks considerably better. If you felt like it was too far, you can always drop that opacity and kind of find a happy medium. But I think that looks pretty darn good. I'm going to come up closer to like 75. And there we go. So that is how I would work with a very light-skinned baby, is making sure that those numbers are a little bit closer together and that we are in that 3rd to a 5th percent of the cyan. All right, and finally we have this baby who is Hispanic. And so he is going to be kind of in between those two. So the first baby had a lot more cyan because she is darker skinned. The second baby was a very white baby, so she had very little cyan. And then this baby should be somewhere in between, closer to that 3rd to a half rather than 3rd to a 5th. So I'm going to go ahead, same process. I'm going to put my eyedropper in the diffused highlight. I'm going to drop this to CMYK, and we're going to look and see how we're doing. And really not too bad. 2 times 13 would be 26. So if anything, we're just a little low in magenta, and maybe a little bit high in cyan if we want to be closer to that 3rd rather than a half. So I'm going to go ahead and add a curves layer, and I'm going to go to my red channel, and I'm just going to bring in a little bit of extra red, get it closer to that 10%. Actually, let's go just a teeny bit less, like maybe like 12. And then let's go to the green channel and just drop the greens just a touch to be closer to that 24. And okay, there we go. So a 3rd would be 33%. So 22% would be half. We're kind of right in between there. And then 24 is right on track for like a little bit less magenta than yellow. So those numbers are pretty darn good. He does look pretty darn light still. So if you wanted to, you could just darken him just a little bit overall to kind of give him a little bit more caramely brown skin tone. But he was pretty darn light in person. He just has those darker undertones like his parents do. So we're just going to bring it down just a teeny bit overall. And then if you didn't want to affect your background, of course, you could paint that in on just his little face. And this is also a good scenario where we are getting those like brighter red tones in his hand. So what I would do there is just do a selective area for his hands. I'm going to go to my hue saturation and just get the red channel and select just those little fingers that are kind of overly red. Just drop this down a little bit. There we go. And then boost that towards the yellows, boost the saturation, and boost the lightness. And there we go. So we took that sting of red out of his hands. And I'm thinking he looks much better. And then if you wanted to take some of the yellow out of his wrap, you could do that as well. I like to use selective color to do that. And so what I will do is go to my selective channel and then go to my whites and pull yellow out that way. And then go to my yellows, and I'm going to pull yellow out of the yellows. And there's before and after, before and after. Now I don't want it to affect his skin because see what it did to our numbers there. So I am just going to come up here and paint out his skin so that it's just affecting the backgrounds and wraps and stuff. Let's get our mask here. Okay, something like that. So now if we go back to the beginning, there's where we started and there's where we are. And again, if that was just a little bit too far for you, you don't want it quite so dark, you can always adjust anywhere on that curve, but you also can just adjust the opacity until it feels right to your eye. And there's before, there's after.